Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. So behind me is a 2007 Nissan Versa, and today I'm going to show you guys how to replace the ignition coils and also spark plugs on this vehicle. Now before we go ahead and begin, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below and definitely smash the like button because it helps the channel out. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started on today's video. So we are positioned in the engine bay, and the first thing that we're going to do is remove this cover. There's two 10mm bolts here. I'm going to use my Milwaukee gun, and we're just going to go ahead and take them off just like so. And to get our engine cover off, all you got to do is simply pull up. There's going to be these little nubs here that go into these grommets that hold it in there. So just kind of pull it out of there and you should be good. Now that we have that out of the way, what I like to do is assess what we really have to move. Now, I know the intake has to come off to be able to do this job, otherwise there's no access to your coils. But what I'm trying to do is be minimally, in the minimalist invasive as I can be. Now, I am going to be replacing my intake manifold gasket, and that does come with a new throttle body gasket. So the way that I believe I'm going to approach this one is to just simply unbolt the throttle body, so that way I don't have to mess with the coolant lines or anything, and then we should be able to just get our intake off that way. Because otherwise we might have to, bend stuff, and I really don't want to do that. So either way, let's go ahead and grab some tools and let's do this. So what I'm going to start off with is we're going to be removing the hose clamps that hold our intake hose into place. Now it's going to be very difficult to see. I'm going to try to get everyone in here on a specific angle like that, and hopefully you're going to be able to see everything. But what we're going to do is go ahead and remove our intake manifold ducting. It's 8mm for the clamps that hold it into place. And once you loosen up the one that goes to the box and to the throttle body, we're going to have this PCV breather hose line here. What you're going to want to do is remove this clamp from the valve cover, or if you prefer from the air box, whichever is easier. And then what I'm going to do is just simply slide this off and try to get it off of our air box just like that. Now the main reason why we needed to do that is so we could make room in our bay area so we can attack our bolts for our throttle body. I believe those are going to be 8mm as well. Let me grab my 8mm here and check it, and yep, that is what they are going to be. So what I'm going to do next is grab my ratchet and let's take those off. I had to move the camera to give us the best positioning, so I got my ratchet with our 8mm and an adapter. And what we're going to do is go ahead and take off the 4 bolts that hold the intake, or the throttle body into place. So I cut the camera there because obviously you don't want to see me removing 4 bolts using my ratchet there. So I basically have taken all of these loose. There's going to be 2 up top, 2 on the bottom. They are all the same size on this specific model, so you can go ahead and mix them up, but that's what they look like, just 4 long bolts. And the reason why I'm removing the the throttle body instead of leaving it on there with the intake is simply due to the fact that there's some coolant lines that run through my throttle body for the heat. So what I like to do is not disturb any of that, just leave it be. That way I don't have to mess around with anything. Now, one thing that I'm also going to remove is this solenoid here for our emission system. I'm going to use a Phillips screwdriver or screwdriver bit on a drill, whatever is easier. And then we're going to go ahead and pull this off to the side as well. There is a little gasket on there. Be careful when you pull it off. Take it easy on it. It could potentially break. Now, one other thing that is in our way, that I know is going to make this a little difficult, is going to be our intake ducting, primarily this one right here. So what I'm going to do is just pull up on this little clip. Now, this is missing one from the looks of it. So what I'm going to do is pull up on that clip, remove it, and what I'm going to do is try to separate it. Now this intake ducting looks like it's been broken by someone. So what I'm going to do is try to snap it off here and take off just our cold air port. And the main reason why is because you want to have access to a few nuts and bolts that are going to be down here. Now, one other thing that we're going to be removing is our coolant bottle. And the way that you release this is there's going to be this tab right here. It's going to be placed right around here. You're going to push it as you pull up. And we're just going to rest that here to the side. Make sure not to spill any coolant. So I have everyone positioned on the other side now, and our intake is held on simply by the intake bolts that bolt up to the block. Then we have a 12mm bolt here on the side. What I'm going to do is go ahead and take a swivel 12mm and get that bolt loosened up and out of there. Now be careful not to drop this. It can fall and it'll make for some fun finding if that was the case. Now let me see if I can get this out of here, just like that. Now I believe this also has a nut on the back side. I believe I dropped my nut. So just so everyone is aware, the bolt that we removed on the side, the 12mm, it does have a nut that holds onto the back of it. So you gotta hold it from back here. I don't know how well the camera's gonna pick that up. It's been a while since I worked on one of these, and I remember it now, but you know, it's funny how you can forget over the years. I haven't done this particular job in a few years, ever since I was at the dealer. But what I'm going to do now is take a 10mm, and there's going to be a few 10mm bolts along the front of the intake here that we're going to remove. Now, I'm not going to show everyone specifically all the bolts right now. As we get the intake off, I will be able to show you. Now for this middle bolt, the dipstick tube is going to be in the way. So we're going to just lift up on the dipstick tube and then go ahead and push that back in and remove our center bolt. Now these bolts are pretty rusted, so I'm gonna have to hit it to get it off of my tool here. And then we should have one more right here in the corner. I believe it's only 3 if memory serves me correct, but let's find out here in a second if that was the case. I believe there's one more hidden one, or 2 more if I'm not mistaken, because I remember doing these at the dealer, and I'm sure this has to come off right here. These are the little holders for your engine cover, because I'm pretty sure there's going to be 2 hidden bolts on this. Let me just get these out of the way. And I apologize, guys, I am fighting a cold right now, so if I sound a little bit different, that's mainly why. So with those little tabs removed, if you go straight in here, there is going to be 2 more 10mm, one here. And we're going to take this one off here. Don't drop it, be very careful. And then we should have one more right here. Alright, so a few minutes have passed. So we have one final bolt left in here. My regular socket was just skipping on it because the bolt head is rusted up. So I took a 3/8 chrome multi-bit that's similar to a 10mm. I've gone ahead and tapped it into place there, and let's see if we can get this off. Alright guys, so I'm back. I was able to get that bolt out now. This is the setup that I did, and what happens on a lot of these 10mm bolts for the intake, and I'll use this one as an example, they are not made out of the best metal. They will have a tendency to rust up and look like that. Now this one, when I had my regular 10mm socket, this one which I use, it was just basically skipping on there. You can even see on this one it barely wants to fit, but look at all that play throughout the years. So basically it was just skipping on there. What I did was I took a 3/8 that was a little bit of a tighter fit, tapped it on there, and I was able to get it off. Now I called Nissan to see if they had these bolts. Fortunately, they do not have them in stock, and they're going to have to be ordered. So I'm going to have to wind up cleaning these up and gently reusing them. I even talked to my customer, and they said that they need the car back. So I got to make do with what we have. But anyway, now that we have all of those off, we should just be able to grab our intake manifold. Let's get some wiring out of the way here, and we should be able to lift up. Now, our dipstick is going to be in the way. So let me just go ahead and take this out, put it to the side, and then we just pull out gently. There's going to be a brake booster wire attached to it. So what I'm going to do is push it off here to the side like this and just get it out of our way. Now if you want, you can remove that booster wire right there, and you're able to get to it, but it's not necessary. You can just move it off to the side right there. Now that we have all that out, you can see we have access to all of our coil packs. There's our intake side right there, and if we look at our intake manifold, those are all the points. So we have the 2 upper points and then the 3 bolts on the bottom. We are going to be replacing this gasket because that gasket is collapsed. So we will definitely not be reusing it. And if you're doing this job, always replace the intake manifold gasket. Otherwise, it may wind up biting you in the end. So just be very mindful of that. So next thing is we're going to unplug our coil packs. Just push down on the tab and they should release fairly easily. Just like so. And this first coil pack here, the connector, it's super long, so it's hard to mix it up. Otherwise, you should be able to know where they all go. And then what we're gonna do is take a bit of an extension here because the way this car is set up, you gotta extend it. But if you're doing this with a hand ratchet, which is the way I should be doing it, let me get another tool here. Sometimes you go in trying to do it quick and you wind up getting yourself in trouble. So we're going to take a 10mm ratchet, break loose all of our coil bolts. With all of the bolts out of the way for our coil pack, all you have to do is simply pull up on the coils and just get them out of the spark plug hole areas. Now as I pull these out, I'm looking at them to see if there's any moisture, and I notice that there's 2 of them that have moisture in them. A little bit of oil. So what I'm going to do is grab my light and do a quick visual to see if we got leaking valve cover gaskets or if it's just residue. And it looks like someone has done the valve cover gasket and there was just some residue that was left over in there. Now, to give everyone a little bit of backstory, because if you're doing this, you might as well replace the spark plugs in the car. And the reason why I'm not going to be replacing the spark plugs is that this customer did the spark plugs themselves. They had a misfire code. They did the spark plugs, put everything back together, and the car still had the misfire code. I diagnosed it. Came out to being a bad coil pack. It was just one coil pack, but with the mileage that this vehicle has, which is over 100,000, and the fact that these coil packs live under the intake where a lot of heat builds up, it's smarter just to get 4 coils and replace them all in one. And that's why we're doing all of them. Now the spark plugs are new. I think he only has about 30-40 miles on the spark plugs. All I'm going to do is go in there and make sure that they are torqued correctly. But other than that, that is the main reason why spark plugs are not going to be swapped out on this. But if you're going this far, you might as well replace your spark plugs, just as a FYI. So even though I'm not going to be replacing the spark plugs in this video, I figured I'd at least show and share information on doing the spark plugs. So once your coil packs are off, these cars have a 14mm spark plug. So you're going to need a 14mm one. It's not a standard size. If you don't have a 14mm spark plug, you could just use a long chrome 14mm. Usually I would use a setup like this. And then what you would do is insert it into the spark plug hole, catch on there, and then simply unscrew your spark plugs and screw in the new ones. Now I'm not actually going to do it. I don't like removing spark plugs in and out once they've been installed, but that's a little information for you. If you are going to be doing this job, keep in mind 14mm is going to be the spark plug socket size. Now our spark plugs are new, so we're going to be leaving it at that. I did go ahead and torque all of mine in place just to make sure that the procedure was done correctly and everything was nice and tight, right on par. So what we're going to do next is go ahead and install our ignition coils. So now it's time to install our coil packs. Now I have my new coils, and typically you'll get something like this, as you can see here. And what I always like to do is take some dielectric grease or tune-up grease, whatever it's called, and always put just a little bit on the end of your coil pack. And what we're going to do is go ahead and start putting them into place where they belong. Now I'm going to grab my other 3 coils, and just to save time on the video, I've gone ahead and I've put dielectric grease in all of them. But what we're going to do is just go ahead and drop all of these in. And when you do coils, what you want to do is go ahead and make sure that they are firmly pressed into place. And then what I like to do is make sure my connectors are nice and good and tight in there. You'll hear them clicking normally. You'll get a little bit of a click sound. And what I'm going to do next is take my 10mm bolts, and what I find you got to do to find a hole sometimes is just kind of wiggle them just like that. It'll help find the hole where they go. Never just take a gun and try to tighten these up. Always do it the easy way, otherwise you could potentially break them. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my ratchet. We're going to tighten all these up. Next thing that we're going to do now that our coil packs are tight is we're going to go ahead and remove our intake gasket here. This old one is weathered. You can see it's a little brittle at some points. We're just going to gently take this off. It's cheap insurance to replace this gasket. If you just spend a couple bucks, it'll save you from going back in there. Even though this job isn't horrible, sometimes it's still a pain. So what I'm going to do is open up my new gasket. Now the new gasket set that I got comes with a throttle body gasket, and it comes with our new intake gasket. And the way this goes in here is like so. We just line it up. Make sure you press it in nice and flat, just like so. And now that we have that in there, what we're going to do is push our intake off to the side. And one thing that you got to always do, regardless if you put your new gasket in place or not, you're going to have to clean up your gasket areas. And what I always like to do is take a little bit of brake cleaner on a rag. So I'm going to spray a blue shop towel that I have here with a little bit of brake cleaner. And what I'm going to do is lightly clean up our areas. Now you don't really have to grind this area up with a die grinder or anything. You're going to see there's going to be some areas that are pitted. Now depending on the application and your specific vehicle, it'll differ, but on ours it's still pretty nice and clean. I've already gone ahead and checked it, and we should be able to reuse our surface without having to take a prep wheel to it or anything. And the next thing that I'm going to do is make sure my gasket is nice and installed in place. And what I'm going to do is take my intake manifold, and this is where it's a little tricky because we got to watch out for all the stuff that wants to spring back into place here. And what I'm going to do is get her lined up here. And just like that, we are somewhat in position. I have it positioned fairly close. And what I'm going to do first is take one of the bolts and go ahead and start it off by hand. Now, always start these bolts by hand. Never just tighten one down and assume that it's good, because it'll wind up biting you in the end. So let me install this corner one here. I always like installing the easy ones, which are the ones that you're able to see, because if you try to install, let's say, the upper ones, those two that are kind of hidden, sometimes what I find is you may be a little bit off of alignment, and it just creates an issue. So I got my shorter set here. See if I can get this started by hand. And basically, you guys get the gist of this. I'm not going to go through and show the whole process here, because you want to start off all 5 of your bolts by hand. Don't tighten any of them all the way just yet. I'm going to go ahead and do that, get everything tightened up. So my plan is I already got the 3 bottom ones in. I'm going to get my 2 that go here, and then I'm going to go ahead and torque them to spec and everything. Now that we have tightened our bolts holding our intake manifold on, and everything is nice and torqued, what I always like to do is put the dipstick back just in case, so we don't drop anything in there. And what I'm going to do is take our supporting bolt and nut and go ahead and get it in here for the side support. This is the 12mm bolt that we removed previously. Now this one is a little bit of a challenge to get back in there, just because of the way everything is supposed to line up, and sometimes your intake will move, which isn't always the best. Like, you can lift up on it a little bit, Unfortunately, sometimes you just gotta maneuver them in there, in and out. Now, I'm gonna put my hose line back up there and get our nut and bolt in here. Just like so. And this bolt doesn't really take a whole lot of torque. You don't really have to get too crazy with it. I'm gonna go ahead and just tighten up snug by hand, and I'll be right back. Now that we've got our whole intake manifold set into place and tightened up, what I'm going to do is just make sure all of my lines and everything that we have here are undisturbed and everything looks good, which it does. Now I'm going to position the camera this way here so we can give everyone the best angle, because I'm going to be working at a certain position. So now what we can do is go ahead and install these little cover holders, I guess you can call them. Not exactly sure what to call these things, but they're basically little brackets that hold up our pretty engine cover, if you want to call it pretty. It's just funny how they engineer this stuff. I mean, I honestly don't like engine covers. To me, they kill the look of the engine, but again, that's just me. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten them up. Now these, I will give everyone a hint. If you didn't pay attention as to how they come off, they'll have a little tab here. It'll lock into the intake, and it'll basically stop itself in the right position. Alright, and just like that, they are nice and tight. I will say one thing I hate about doing this job is that these fasteners Nissan used, I mean, talk about cheap of the cheapest. They are just no good whatsoever. All the hardware always rust on these cars. Enough me ragging about the hardware that Nissan cheaped out on, and they rust up. So what I'm going to do next is pull my throttle body forward and go ahead and take off our old throttle body gasket. Now this gasket is actually new. We wound up doing a throttle body in this vehicle not too long ago. As everyone can see, it's still nice and shiny. Now with that said, what you also want to do is, if you're doing this job, this would be a nice time to clean out your throttle body. You have access to it, and we are going to be installing a new gasket, so by all means take advantage of it. So do that. Now I grabbed my new throttle body gasket. We're going to just slide our throttle body to the side. There's going to be a little point that's supposed to face up, and it lines up, so there's no way you can really mess up installing this gasket as long as you're paying attention to how you're putting things back. But what I'm going to do here is just get it nice and tucked in. It is a little bit annoying because we are fighting it in a little bit of a, I guess you can say, tight space here. So I'm going to line this up as good as I can. Make sure you press it in all the way. The biggest thing with these gaskets is making sure that you press them in the correct orientation and get them in there. I always go over them, make sure they're nice and flat, just like that. So with ours being nice and flat, we have our new gasket installed. Just because it's annoying me and it's in the way, I'm going to reinstall our little solenoid here for our emission system, just because it helps get it out of the way and keeps it in place. And this one had the Phillips screws on there, and be careful, you don't want to jam this in there like a crazy person. You just want to basically start them off. Now don't tighten this top bolt like I did right away, because it'll give you an issue. So just like that, we have everything tightened up. Make sure it's nice in place, and it is. And the next step would be to get our throttle body hooked up. Now I'm going to grab my 4 throttle body bolts, and this is going to be pretty self-explanatory, but however, I'm still going to explain it here on the first one. What I like to do to line this up is take one bolt, push it through, and then just get it started, and just like that, a couple threads on it. And then we're going to proceed to the bottom bolt here. Kind of wiggle your throttle body around and get that positioned. Once you get that hand threaded and positioned in, your other bolts, kind of the same thing, do a wiggle and a jiggle, if you want to say that, and just get them lined up just like that. Once you get all 4 of them in there, and the worst one of all, at least as far as not being able to see, is going to be this back one. Once you get them hand threaded a little bit, just like I did, you can go ahead and start tightening them up. So now our throttle body is back into place and everything is looking good. What I'm going to do, just so I don't forget, I should have did this after I got my intake bolts hooked up, but we're going to go ahead and take our coolant bottle and I'm going to try to put this back into place here. I might have to wind up switching the camera around just like so, but basically take your coolant bottle, make sure you route everything the way it should go here, and ours is gonna go in just like so, and make sure you snap it back into place, and we are golden with it. And the next step would be to go ahead and get our hose back in for our throttle body. Now this can either be easy or complicated. It really depends on how brittle this piping is. Now mine is pretty brittle, I'm not gonna lie. I hate this part of it, but we're gonna position it here. You can actually tell it takes a little bit of strength here to get these 2 pieces to mate. They are pretty I guess you can say hardened up, and you want to be careful not to break them, but you know, you'll be able to get them in. If you tear this boot, you should be replacing it because you will have an air leak past the mass airflow sensor, and you will have either a misfire or some sort of issue where the car's not going to run right. So just be mindful of that. Now also don't forget to tighten up your clamps on your boots. So our intake boot on this side is nice and tight, and I'm going to do the same thing here on my throttle body. I'm using my gun, but my gun has a limiter, so I don't over tighten it. So for those of you thinking that I'm just going crazy with it, I'm not. Everything is limited on there. Next thing that we're going to do, and it looks like this moved out of the way a little bit, is we're going to install our cold air intake part of this, or our scoop, if you want to call it that. I mean, this is just, it's so broken, and this thing barely works or functions probably, but at least it gets some sort of cold air to the intake, I guess, or to the air filter. Either way, this one had one clip that we are going to install, and I apologize, I just realized that's probably out of frame, but right here, so all that is nice and tight. Now that our intake boot and everything is tightened up, let's not forget the important step, which is putting on this engine cover. So what we're gonna do is go ahead and line this up. Make sure you push the bottom parts in so that way it's good. And then what I'm going to do is take my gun and my hardware. They're 10mm bolts, and you always got to start these off by hand. If you don't, you will regret it. Trust me, it's happened to me. These strip out very easily. A big thing why I hate the way they did this and why I hate engine covers, because when you use bolts on plastic like this, they have a tendency to want to break. So hand thread them first, light tap them in there. So that's how easy it is to replace spark plugs and ignition coils on a Nissan Versa. The majority of this is pretty straightforward. The one thing that I do hate about these cars that I probably mentioned in the video is the fact that I hate the hardware. Nissan use cheap hardware. You gotta use, you know, half sizes and things like that, like 3/8 I used commonly to tighten up most of the bolts. They rust up. You put a 10 on them, they just, you know, it just doesn't work out too well. So you gotta play around with that. If I had the time frame and I had known this vehicle had those issues, I would have ordered them from the dealer, but unfortunately time didn't allow it. The customer needed the car back, so we just went ahead and did it the best we could. But overall, everything got tightened up. It's quick, simple, and easy. Hopefully this video helps you guys out. Please comment, like, and subscribe because it definitely helps the channel grow. Hope everyone has a wonderful day, and I'll catch you on the next video.